a man is captured by security cameras buying equipment for what appeared a day in the garden.
He bought the incinerator, which he later used to burn things in the garden. He bought his coveralls, mask and shoe protectors, things like that.
He bought a chainsaw too, but this was no do-it-yourself enthusiast. The man, Thomas Dunkley, was supposedly helping out a boxer that he had hero-worshipped, a fighter who once had legitimate dreams of a world title, but who was left paralyzed and bedridden after a traffic accident. The self-styled governor, Sha Cummins.
Yeah, it could have been so different for me.
Boxing was his life.
You're making him vulnerable, you're making him dependent. Those are two things that the Governor Cummins, had never been.
Sha Cummins would lose the last fight of his life, murdered by someone who was supposed to be his cornerman.
They phoned me up and just said there'd been a death at the house. They didn't say who it was.
And they also did not reveal how Shaun's body had been found, dismembered.
A human body, is a very unwieldy, heavy, difficult object. And if you can cut it down into pieces, they become more manageable.
The hunt for a murderer soon focused on Thomas Dunkley. If it was him, what would be the mistake to prove he was a cold-blooded killer? It appears incongruous enough buying power tools from a DIY store. But this image from a security camera would change the course of an investigation into the death of Sha Cummins, a charismatic, powerful and exciting boxer, Sha Cummins, who'd been quite the star in his hometown of Leicester.
So Sha has a following, and it's a lively following, and that's because he's a lively character. He's a face. He's the top dog. He's called the Governor.
He paired with Chris Eubanks, Prince Nazim, in Sheffield and Manchester places, fought a lad called Steve Collins, and he was who won the title and became top 10 in the Pentacontinental champion. He was a very good boxer. He had punches and combinations of punches that no other boxer used.
In the mid-90s, Shaun's promising career hit the canvas with a series of devastating events. A referee's bad decision snatched European middleweight glory from his grasp. He had floored his opponent, Agostini Codamone, with a devastating left hook. There was no way his opponent could beat the 10-second count. Or maybe there was.
Sha rightfully won the European title that night in San Remo. Cardamone was given so much time to recover, he managed to see it out to the final bell, and he won a disputed points decision.
I mean, I threw the left hook moving away from Cardamone, and I didn't deliver it as a knockout punch, and the next thing I know, as I'm stepping away, he's going over. So I slung a right, and unfortunately it missed. But, you know, yeah, it could have been so different for me.
A second heartbreak was to follow. Cummins failed a routine MRI scan. His license to fight was revoked by the boxing authorities.
He had the scan, and the British Board of Control said he couldn't fight. I think Sha was at a loose end. His career curtailed, and he weren't in a good place.
Heartbroken, Sha struggled to keep his life on track.
And I made a few errors with, you know, in life, and ended up doing a little bit of porridge, and I really tried to get myself back in the ring, and I was really up for getting my determination had come back, and, you know, I really believed I could still be a force and become a world champ. But I just never seemed to get the
breaks.
The breaks, Steve.
In the boxing business, it's a small, big family, so you keep hearing things. So you'd hear something, someone would say, "You seen Sha Cummins lately?" And I'd say, no, I haven't seen him since he boxed Neville Brown. And someone would say, well, he's 18 stone, he's working on the door, he's mad about bikes, he's working with Blue, the boy band, he's going to open a boxing gym. Oh, he looks like he's done loads and loads of steroids, he's 20 stone.
The rumours were true. With his boxing career over, Cummins put his talents and his reputation as a hard man to use. He put on 7 stone of muscle and found work as a bodyguard and nightclub bouncer. The journey to meeting his killer had just begun.
He was working the doors, yes, even debt collecting, I believe, at one time. And he actually ended up bodyguarding. And he was looking, before his accident, that he would be bodyguarded to the Black Eyed Peas, or even, I think, the group Blue.
As if being, as he saw it, cheated in a big fight and then losing his license to box, then reluctantly accepting a job as a nightclub heavy, in 2004, Sha Cummins' life suffered yet another traumatic downturn.
I was involved in an accident in 2004, and I've currently been bedridden, unfortunately. I was on a motorbike. It was a lovely, clear, sunny day on a Sunday afternoon. The next thing I know, a lady's pulled straight out in front of me in a Shogun, and bingo.
Cummins had to fight for his life.
I broke my back, I broke my sternum, I broke all my rib cage on the left-hand side, I punctured a lung. You know, it was pretty horrific. But it's remarkable, I didn't get knocked out. I lay on the road, I took my crash helmet off, and I repeatedly said my lad's name out loud, because I honestly did think it was curtains, and I wanted to go out with my lad's name at least on my lips.
Against the odds, Cummins survived the crash. After 4 months in hospital, he was allowed home, but within weeks, an accident at home left him with an infected wound which refused to heal. Doctors became gloomy about Cummins' chances of ever walking again. For now, he was bedbound.
Suddenly, you'd stick that giant man with that giant ego and that giant mentality into a bed. Not for 6 months of rehab, where he's going to come out afterwards, do a little bit of work and ride off or run off into the sunset, but for year after year after year after year.
The governor, the well-known face, the mighty boxer who was popular with the ladies and attracted roaring crowds at his fights, was lonely, bored, isolated.
Sean had some of the boxing fraternity that raised money for him. They had venues for him, you know, and he got that sort of, but they did sort of disappear once Sean was, you know, in his bed, in his little bungalow in the Saffron Lane. And yes, he didn't get many people visiting him then.
The fighter was not about to throw in the towel.
He always believed that he would walk again. He never gave up the fight. He thought that there was out there stem cell surgery to the spinal cord, and he was hoping that one day he could actually walk. He said he had feelings in his right leg.
I was initially told that I had no chance of walking again and I would be wheelchair dependent for the rest of my life. However, I did go through a series of tests at the Leicester City Royal Infirmary, and one of the chaps there detected a little bit of movement when I was trying to push my legs, and he was leaning against them.
Cummins had been knocked down many times and in many ways, but he persevered, stuck at trying to make a living.
I've been busy working on a new website that I've launched, which is BritishBoxingGreats.co.uk/forum. So basically, you know, I really enjoy myself with the boxing forum, and you know, the boxing trade has been right with extended family really and helped me out.
But on the same radio phone-in with Steve Bunce, the commentator and longtime friend, Sean broke the news that in reality, his condition had got worse since his original accident.
I was involved in an accident in 2004. Now, I was hospitalised for about 4 months,
Yeah.
and then an accident occurred at home, and I cut myself, unfortunately, on my backside, and it got infected, and I had to have a couple of operations, and so I've been stuck in bed now for 5 years.
It was very, very hard to see Sean as he was. He was in a bad place.
The once mighty boxer, the club doorman people feared, the man who had taken more than one wrong path in his life, found himself weak, ill, reliant on others for help, reliant on a local man called Thomas Dunkley, and not everybody was happy about it.
I think Tom was obviously devious. There was an agenda somewhere.
Tom Dunkley was about to become, for Sha Cummins, what they call in boxing a corner man. And he did have an agenda: to get rich quick. The journey to murder had begun. Tom Dunkley had offered to help a man that he considered a boxing star. Dunkley himself had been a boxer.
He'd had a go at boxing and he showed some promise. From what I was told, he looked like he could be a pretty decent fighter, but I don't think it really worked out for him.
Dunkley jumped at the chance to get close to the local hero.
He was certainly a fan, and he was certainly in awe of Sean when he met him.
He saw Cummins as a shortcut to money and a better life. He'd heard that Sean was setting up a new business, a private gym.
Tom Dunkley was promised a role in a gymnasium that Sean was invested in, and Tom was going to be installed in some management or part of that business that Sean was, funding.
He always thought the payday was around the corner.
After becoming paralysed, Cummins had won £400,000 in compensation, money that went into a trust fund for his care and his day-to-day living. So Dunkley may indeed have believed that there was money around for him to benefit from.
Dunkley and Cummins met because Dunkley was a runner for Dave Pratt. Dave Pratt was a signatory on the trust that Sean got after his accident, and so Dunkley got involved there as a go-between for the two of them.
Dunkley would later admit that he was drawn to people with money, people whose lives were more comfortable than his. But frustrated and lonely, perhaps naively, Cummins welcomed the company.
In those early days, they'd play computer games together, and he'd just be a companion for Sean. They had loads in common because what they both loved was boxing.
Inside his home, Cummins gave Dunkley some training tips. They watched films, talked. Dunkley would go out and pick up takeaway for them both. They swapped boxing stories. Both sides seemed to relish the friendship. Dunkley began running errands for his bedridden friend, changing the sheets, making sure he had water, picking up medication.
Tom Dunkley was a very nice man on the outside, very quiet. There was a relationship where Sean was actually training Tom Dunkley with the weights. So Sean was even a trainer. He trained Tom Dunkley, and the friendship was sort of a bond of that.
Tellingly, he went to the bank for Sean, helped manage his finances. Jane Monckton-Smith, a leading criminologist, has been reviewing events surrounding the lives of Sha Cummins and Tom Dunkley.
He was quite trusted, and he was trusted with his finances and things like that, and he would run errands for him. So it was quite a general role, and perhaps there was even kind of a friendship there between them.
Not that Dunkley made an ideal carer.
Tom Dunkley prepared meals for Sean, and in the kitchen it was not the tidiest, and it was, unhealthy, unhygienic. And I said to Sean at the time that I don't think you should have him cooking your food for you. But Sean said he's my friend, and they were a partnership.
Sean's injuries and disability meant that he needed regular medication. He had daily visits at home from community nurses. It would be those same health workers who later realised that something was wrong in Sha Cummins' world. What would set the alarm bells ringing?
A community nurse got suspicious about what was going on at the house. She wasn't happy with Thomas Dunkley.
As time wore on inside the house, frictions became apparent. Hard men like Sean Cummins don't change overnight. True to his reputation, Cummins was not an easy or grateful patient.
Medical professionals who'd seen him would say that Sean could be difficult, he could be very demanding.
He may have been paralysed, but Cummins was still, in his mind, the governor. He could be moody, overbearing, even violent towards Dunkley.
And I think there were probably times when he lost his temper with Dunkley and got aggressive with him.
It seemed to be an unequal friendship, one physically able but bullied and perhaps even abused, the other reduced to a shadow of his former self, but still able to throw a punch at his so-called friend. What made Thomas Dunkley stick around? Where was he earning money? Certainly not from Sean Cummins. To those closest to Cummins, something simply didn't ring true.
Sean believed he worked for somebody and his boss was letting him come and care for him. I knew that he had a family, but he was always round Sean's. You know, and it was strange.
Well, there was no financial arrangement between Dunkley and Cummins. That was part of Dunkley's problem. I think he always thought he would get paid for being a carer, for looking after Sean.
And he needed the money.
At the time we got involved in the investigation, Dunkley's finances were in a pretty poor state. He was in debt to the tune of north of £15,000.
The gymnasium that Cummins would co-own and where Dunkley hoped to be given a lucrative job never materialised. The payday Dunkley was holding out for never arrived. In fact, Cummins never paid Dunkley a penny for the years of fetching and carrying, cooking and cleaning. How did Dunkley feel when he realised his caring services were all for nothing?
I think that he became weary of waiting for this and probably more and more bitter. But I think ultimately that's what drove him to do what he did.
Broke, trapped in a toxic friendship, Thomas Dunkley felt used. For 2 years he'd been Sean Cummins' de facto carer. He'd given up his job, got into debt, lost his girlfriend, all to become an unpaid errand assistant, cook, cleaner, general whipping boy for the egotistical former boxing champ known as the Governor. That's how Dunkley saw it. It was time to cash in on his arrangement with Sean Cummins, but what exactly would that mean? The relationship between the two men inside a modest house was, for one of them, all about money. On the 2nd of September 2012, a community nurse arrived at Sean Cummins' bungalow for a routine visit. Dunkley answered the door and told her the patient wasn't there.
This was a regular visit, turned up at the house to look after Sean, and Dunkley answered the door and he sent them away.
She'd been told by Thomas Dunkley that Sean was in hospital, and he told her that he'd been taken ill and had to go into hospital.
When she'd visited the previous day, Cummins had been weak and unwell. He had pneumonia and was suffering from bladder and kidney infections.
The fact is, Sean had been ill, and the nurses knew this. His community nurses had visited him, and he was ill. So hearing this on the 1st of September, as she did, it was no massive surprise to her.
A few days later, the previously penniless Tom Dunkley appeared to have come into money.
So by the 4th of September, Thomas Dunkley had started spending Sean's money. He had gone to the bank, he'd drawn out cash, he started eating out, buying himself clothes. He even went and bought a car. I think he took about £11,000 out of Sean's bank account. And this was something that he can't have thought about very deeply, because this is something that's going to come back on him.
It would be over a week before the nurse realised that something was terribly wrong in that little bungalow.
They started making inquiries. They couldn't find any record of Sean in the hospital. So they called him, they called his phone.
9-10 days later, when nobody had heard anything of Sean, she rang the house. And Dunkley immediately put her on guard because he answered the phone and pretended to be Sean. And she thought, how strange.
He must have been at some level panicking to have said something that was so ridiculous.
He was insisting still now, 9-10 days after she'd first seen him, that Sean was still in hospital and that he was in a hospital near Dudley in the West Midlands. The conversation ended and the nurse, very switched on, a medical professional, she just wasn't having any of that. She didn't believe a word he was saying. So she started to make her own inquiries, and she inquired with Leicester Hospitals Trust and rang various hospitals in the West Midlands, in the Dudley area, rang the GP that Sean used. Nobody had any record of Sean Cummins being admitted to hospital. So she rang the police.
Leicestershire's police missing persons team called Dunley. Like the nurse, they weren't convinced about what they were discovering, specifically no sight nor sound of Sean Cummins and a worried community nurse.
They had a conversation. She told the officer what she thought. He then called Thomas Dunley and he had a conversation with him, and he wasn't happy either. Immediately, senses on alert, he thought, no, that's not right.
So they went round to the house.
And when they couldn't get a response at the address, they forced entry.
The police officers were about to make a gruesome discovery.
The first thing they found when they forced entry was something they smelled. What they smelled was what we in the police and what any police officer will tell you is called the smell of death. There's no smell like it, and when you smell it, you know what it is. So those officers, as they moved into that house, knew they were looking for a body by this time.
What had happened to Sean Cummins?
It was unbelievable what actually happened in that house.
The fighter had fought his last bout, and he had lost. The public could not yet be told about what officers had discovered at the home of Sean Cummins. First, the family had to be notified.
I was actually on holiday at the time. They phoned me up and just said there'd been a death at the house. They didn't say who it was. And I said, well, it's Sean then.
Could the champion boxer, he wondered, have finally succumbed to the catastrophic injuries and illnesses that had blighted his life for so many years?
He'd had bouts of illnesses, but always recovered from them. He was a fighter.
Steve would soon learn that his brother had not succumbed to illness. His death had been a violent one. But apart from the awful stench, at first, police searching the property saw little.
There was nothing particularly about the state of the property to say that anything had happened other than what they found. Later, detailed forensic examination found minute blood traces and things like that. But generally speaking, no, there was no sign of a disturbance. It wasn't a very tidy house.
But they couldn't escape the overpowering smell. They kept on looking.
What they found was something a hell of a lot worse than just finding a body. What they found when they started to get into the kitchen was 3 freezers. And within the freezers were the 10 body parts of the decapitated Sean Cummins.
The dismemberment of his body indicated he had been murdered. Dame Sue Black is a world-renowned expert in analysing why and how a body is dismembered.
So a murder has usually occurred before you have dismemberment, and suddenly you're faced with a body and you have the panic that says, how do I get rid of it?
I believe that Sean had actually died from an illness for a start until I found out the graphics of the case.
Senior Detective Steve Shuttleworth realised that there were many people who Sean had come into contact with over the years who might be capable of violent crime.
Sean Cummins came from a world where not only was he a boxer, which is a profession that can attract trouble, he also then went on to be not only a doorman but also a bodyguard. And again, we're talking about 2 professions that attract trouble. So these were always going to be lines of inquiry that had to be followed.
Sean was a bit of an on-edge character. Some people might call him a bully. I did hear there was a prison sentence. I did hear that he'd had plenty of run-ins. I did hear that he was upsetting all sorts of people in Leicester. And that doesn't surprise me. That would be classified as fairly Sean Cummins behaviour.
Despite having made enemies around town, detectives' instincts suggested that the field of suspects might soon be narrowed down to just one: Sean's friend and helper, Thomas Dunkley. He was missing. What was that about?
But what we're really talking about here is the fact that Thomas Dunkley has caused this suspicion. A body has been found in an address where Thomas Dunkley says Sean wasn't and that he was in hospital. And really getting to the point, Thomas Dunkley's nowhere to be seen.
At that point, no precise cause of death could actually be ascertained.
One of the complications in this case was that because Sean's body had been dismembered and into about 10 parts, I think, it was impossible for the forensic pathologist to actually find what the cause of death was.
But the decision to dismember Sean's body says much about the killer.
Most people who find themselves in a situation of having committed a murder or a homicide don't think about the problem of the body. And the body is a problem.
The killer may have thought cutting up Sean's body might mean that he could hide his murder.
He may have thought that if he got rid of the body entirely and was able to clean that scene entirely, that was a way out for him. So I think the chopping up of the body parts was a precursor to getting rid of those body parts.
We call it an aggressive form of dismemberment because it is about rendering the body down into parts for the purposes of hiding them, of transporting them somewhere else so that you can hide them away. So you're trying to conceal the fact that a death has occurred. The dismemberment itself is really just a practical extension of the situation the individual finds themselves in now with a body. How do you get rid of it?
By buying a chainsaw, the killer may have thought chopping up a body would be easy. Another mistake.
And clearly, Sean was a man who was very big. His body weight in stones numbered in the 20s. He was a massive guy. He was an immensely strong man, even when he was disabled and in that bed. And that, he could never have got rid of Sean's body in one piece. So for me, this was him preparing to get rid of that body in parts, and I think that's what his plan was.
I think people believe they are more forensically aware than they actually are. And that's largely to do with television telling them, you know, I did this and this is what happened. They then have a go at it perhaps themselves and find that it is not easy. It is a really difficult thing to do, to dismember a body, both psychologically, but actually physically as well, because a body of an adult is a heavy thing. It's wet because you've got a copious amounts of blood and fat that will start to liquefy as you touch it. And you're also trying to get a contact between a blade and tissue. So it's physically very demanding.
Leicestershire's homicide police needed to find Thomas Dunkley and uncover exactly what had gone on in the bungalow owned by Sha Cummins. They followed the evidence, the clues a killer may have left behind.
So the forensic side of the investigation starts to take place, and meanwhile the search for Thomas Dunkley commences. And we quickly find that he has borrowed his brother's car and gone off in his brother's car, and the registration number is provided to the officers that were called out on that night.
Officers suspected that whoever had dismembered Sean's body would have needed tools. They trawled through images caught by in-store cameras at nearby DIY stores.
We had Dunkley on CCTV buying the chainsaw.
He buys overalls and face masks and bags. For the previous week, he'd been functioning quite normally. He'd been going out, he'd been spending his money, nobody had been really suspicious about his actions. And then all of a sudden on the 7th, we get this big change where he takes things a whole step further and buys that equipment.
Further inquiries proved that Dunkley had used Sean's credit card. Was the chainsaw used to dismember Sean's body? This was a key turning point in the investigation. It offered a clear idea of what might have happened, a credible narrative for officers to investigate. Detectives, when searching Sha Cummins' house, had found a laptop. They wondered if further evidence might emerge of Dunkley's guilt.
The laptop computer that was of most interest was one that we thought Dunkley had been using at the address.
is just a very sick man. For the idea of thinking he could get away with it.
Straight away, they felt that they could reconstruct the hard drive of the computer and get the information, and they did, and they got a huge tranche of information.
And there were Google searches around the same day that was the last time that Sean was seen.
Amongst which were search engine trawls which could only have been made by Dunkley. What happens when you're stabbed in the stomach? How long does it take to die after you're stabbed?
What happens when somebody bleeds to death?
What happens if you cut a carotid artery? How long does it take to die? How long does a body take to go off? Searches like that. What happens if you inject bleach into the veins? So searches about how to kill, and then later searches about what do you do with the body when you've got it.
It's quite surprising the amount of people who commit a murder or plan to commit a murder will go onto the internet and search how to do that. And it's not a sensible thing to do if you don't want to get caught. You know, it leaves a forensic trail.
Shuttleworth and his team now felt certain they could get a conviction. But where was their chief suspect?
We quickly find that he has borrowed his brother's car. That started to show up after a few hours because it went through an automatic number plate recognition camera on the M1 going northbound, and then ultimately a call came in to say that one of their armed response vehicles had found the car on the Woolly Edge services in Wakefield.
In the early hours of the 13th of September, Dunkley was arrested just 85 miles from the scene of the crime. Pathology reports suggested that Sha Cummins had died days before his body parts were found, throughout which time it seemed Thomas Dunkley had stayed put.
Dunkley stayed living effectively in the house after killing him. Now we think that he killed Sean sometime around about the 1st of September.
12 days later, he had bolted. Why wait so long? It appeared that Dunkley thought he had plenty of time to cover his tracks. He was now in police custody, and he had a story to tell. Yes, he was in the house where Sean's dismembered body parts had been. Yes, he was captured on CCTV buying equipment which could have been used in the dismemberment. Yes, he may have cut the body up, but Sean had simply died. Dunkley had not known what to do on finding his friend's body.
He said to the police that Sean had died in his sleep of natural causes, and for some reason he had panicked and decided that he needed to get rid of the body.
Dunkley admitted chainsawing up Sean's body, but I don't remember him ever discussing how hard it was. I found Dunkley from listening to him give evidence in court, and particularly from his police interviews, and the interviewing officers felt this too. He was really calm. He was really in control. He was a good liar.
I don't think anybody actually believed that. It does seem like a very strange thing to claim after the event. Why wouldn't you call an ambulance? But that's what he said.
Had Dunkley made a mistake which would lead to a guilty verdict in a court of law? Or might he get away with it? The challenge facing detectives now that Thomas Dunkley had been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Sha Cummins was to get the evidence needed to secure a conviction to uncover the killer's mistake. When he was arrested, Thomas Dunkley told police that Cummins had died in his sleep.
There's always got to be some doubt, and when you're investigating a murder or investigating any serious crime, you have to investigate every relevant line of inquiry.
It was time to review the evidence before it was put to the jury, which, if any, would be the mistake that would lead to Dunkley's conviction.
Thomas Dunkley said that he had not murdered Sha Cummins. He said that Sean had died of natural causes, and he pointed to the fact that we knew Sean had been ill, and he said having noticed that Sean had died, he panicked, and he thought he may get the blame for that, and the story wasn't all that plausible, really. Who does that?
Maybe nobody, but that was not enough to take to court.
We had Dunkley on CCTV buying the chainsaw he used to chop Sean's body up. He bought that from a local DIY store, just a couple of miles away from where Sean lived. He bought it with Sean's credit card. He was already using his murder victim's credit card by this time. And he bought a lot of other kit that he would need, kit to clean up with. He bought the incinerator, which he later used to burn things in the garden. He bought his coveralls, mask and shoe protectors.
In fact, Dunkley was recorded again and again on CCTV, seemingly relaxed over several days, as he used Cummins' credit cards to gather together everything that he needed to dispose of the boxer's body. He didn't go on the run after the killing because he thought he could cover all traces of his crime.
It's hard to pin down exactly, but he was buying things to chop the body up on around about the 7th of September. By this time, he'd realised that it was starting to smell in there and he needed to do something. And he thought if he chopped up the body parts and froze them, he'd get rid of the smell.
Dunkley didn't realise that in plotting to make Cummins disappear, he had left a trail of digital evidence that proved exactly what he wanted to do. Was this his ultimate mistake? Over the next few days, police were to uncover other flaws in his planning. His brother was hearing more of Sean's death.
I found out the research that Dunkley had. How long does it take to die from a stab wound to the neck?
Dunkley would continue to deny that he had played any part in Cummins' death, but detectives felt they had enough to charge him with murder.
There was CPS advice with what we had from interview, with the chopping up of the body, and we had things like a next door neighbour had a carer who saw him burning things in the garden and thought that was very suspicious. We had him running from the police. Clearly, the fact that Sean had been chopped into 10 pieces and he was admitting doing that.
From the moment that Dunkley took the decision to kill, he began making mistakes. The decision to dismember Sean's body, a classic error. It immediately put him in the frame.
In dismemberments, the victim and the suspect know each other. And so it normally occurs in the property associated with one or either individual. It would be extremely rare for a dismemberment to be stranger-oriented. Most of them are because there's been some form of personal conflict between the two individuals. So we will always go and look at areas that are known to the victim and the suspect, the homes of the victim and the suspect, looking for evidence that the dismemberment has occurred.
Dunkley's next mistake was thinking that he could erase his digital footprint.
The laptop computer that was of most interest was one that we thought Dunkley had been using at the address, and the initial findings from that laptop were disappointing.
The hard drive on Dunkley's laptop had been corrupted. Detectives sent it to IT experts who found his search history.
And they got a huge tranche of information which we were able to attribute to Thomas Dunkley, which was a mass of searches about how to kill somebody. And we were able to attribute those to Thomas Dunkley.
Dunkley made those online searches between the 1st and 2nd of September, hours after Cummins was last seen alive by the community nurse. It was the last piece of the puzzle the police needed to prove that Dunkley had deliberately killed Cummins. Believing he could beat the computer experts, failing to destroy his laptop, these were fatal mistakes for the killer. But what was his motive? Continuing to deny the murder, Dunkley never gave police an explanation. But all the evidence suggested money and greed had a lot to do with it.
I think he was there just after Sean's money, basically. I think that was the crux.
He used Sean's identity to get loans, but he did, with money he got, start to repay things.
When Cummins was still alive, Dunkley had abused his position as his carer to treat Cummins' trust fund as Dunkley's own personal bank account. After the murder, the scale of his theft and deception escalated.
He went to a local Vauxhall dealer and put a deposit down on a car. He went to see a mortgage advisor and he bought all sorts of things for members of his family. I think he bought a washing machine for somebody and he bought toys for children who he was related to and other things. They must have wondered where the money was coming from because he never had any money. But he went off spending Sean's money.
Police traced when and where Cummins' cards had been used. Dunkley was caught 3 times on CCTV using cash machines to draw money out of Cummins' account. Dunkley's spending spree gave detectives everything they needed to prove the motive for his terrible crimes. Detectives suspected he was taking what he thought was rightfully his.
I think Thomas Dunkley always thought he would ultimately get some reward and some pay for the amount of care he was giving. And I think that he became weary of waiting for this, and probably more and more bitter. I think Thomas Dunkley saw Sean as something of a bully, and that's not something we've got any evidence for, but I think ultimately that's what drove him to do what he did.
In court, the police convincingly made the case that Dunkley had been motivated by greed. He admitted to stealing over £10,000 from Sean Cummins. Despite his claims of innocence, the jury found him guilty of murder. The police were satisfied that a cold, calculating and dangerous man had been locked away.
He was found guilty and he was handed down a large sentence, which was initially 34 years, to go with his life sentence. He was calm, and I've thought that since when he came to the appeal. A very calm man and able to hold it together, so maybe the kind of person who could carry out that act without it troubling him too much.
Even the police were shocked by this crime. It's a particularly awful crime. It's not only has there been a murder, which is bad enough, it's what he did with Sean's body afterwards. An awfully shocking thing to do, and says so many things about Thomas Dunkley, because not many people would be capable of dismembering a body.
Thomas Dunkley was far from a clever killer. Aside from choosing a method of disposing of the body which immediately put him in the frame, he left an indelible digital record of his every movement, including being captured on camera soon after the murder.
CCTV played a big part in the murder investigation. We had Dunkley on CCTV buying the chainsaw.
There are 6 million cameras in public spaces throughout the United Kingdom, more than anywhere in the Western world. Thomas Dunkley had made many mistakes before, during and after the murder of Sean Cummins. But for detectives, the key turning point, the killer's mistake, was being caught on camera using a stolen credit card and buying precisely the kit that he would need to dismember a body.
Amongst the many mistakes that Dunkley made, the one that he really couldn't find an explanation for or wriggle out of was going out and buying the equipment to dismember Sean's body. There's no excuse for that. There's nothing he could come up with in court that would explain that away. And so probably, of his many mistakes, that was the biggest one.
It was a mistake which cost him a sentence that will not see him eligible to parole until 2047. Not that Thomas Dunkley appeared to care as he stood in the court dock.
He was calm. Usually, you get a lot of shouting, or you get crying, falling about, and you get relatives shouting and screaming. Thomas Dunkley, calm. His head went down a little bit because he just let his life go, but he was calm.